Hello everyone, welcome into Fatty's Feast, where we make the best food you'll ever eat without leaving your backyard. My name is Josh. Today I'm gonna show you how to properly trim and season a brisket for smoking. So your brisket goes from looking like this to looking like this. Let's get started. Yes, here we go. Guys, I'm so excited to make this video for you. I have been saying I want to do a brisket video forever now, and the time has finally come. Now this is actually going to be a 4-part series. I could make an hour-long video, but no one wants to watch that. So this is part 1 of 4. This is trimming and prepping and seasoning, like I just said. Part 2 will be the first half of the cook, part 3 will be the second half of the cook, and then part 4 will be slicing the brisket for serving. And that way, if you have specific things you want to review or specific questions you have, you can go to those videos individually instead of sitting through an hour-long video. Another reason I'm shooting this entire video today and making it 4 separate parts is I will actually be traveling the country for the next 3 weeks or so. So I won't necessarily have time to make videos like I normally do, but I'll try my best to respond to comments or questions you guys have over that time. But anyway, let's talk about this brisket. So this bad boy right here is a USDA choice grade whole packer brisket from Costco, Kirkland brand. Total $45.93 at $3.79 per pound, which is a lot better than it has been in recent months. And it was 12.12 pounds. So you can see we got decent marbling on the inside here, nice even fat cap. And that's actually the first thing I want to talk about is your brisket selection. Now first, the weight. Like I said, this is a 12.12 pound brisket. I typically don't do anything under 10 pounds, at least whole packer briskets. And I try to avoid anything over 16. And how you'll decide how big of a brisket you want is basically how many people do you need to feed and how long do you want to sit outside tending a fire? Or really, how long do you want to smoke it if you're using a pellet smoker? I factor in about an hour per pound for the most part. So this should take about 12 hours and then we're gonna let it rest overnight. Another thing you wanna think about is what kind of grade beef do you want? Now, if you're unfamiliar, there's 3 main choices. You have your select, your choice, and your prime. I would never buy a select brisket. That's like low-end beef quality. There's not gonna be enough marbling to really keep it moist. This one right here is choice, and I typically don't get choice, but choice is the lowest I go. The only reason I got a choice brisket is that's all that Costco had. So your choice brisket's a fine choice, get it? It's got enough marbling, it'll get the job done. Prime briskets are what I normally buy. That's your higher end, great marbling, great fat content, and they just always come out juicy as hell. But you gotta go with what you can get. At the end of the day, just get the quality of brisket that you can afford. You can't go wrong with a choice brisket if you can't afford a prime or whatever, it's fine. And then when I'm actually selecting the brisket I want, first I'm looking at the pliability. This one seems pretty pliable. That's a sign that it wasn't frozen. I love Costco briskets, but sometimes I pick them up and I'm like, oh, this is a little stiff. So I'm not 100% sure they don't freeze their briskets once in a while. The next thing I'm gonna look at is the fat cap. Are there any bald spots? Which this is a little bald over here, but I think that comes out. We might end up cutting that off. But I see no bald spots, looks really good. The next thing I look at is the flat section of the brisket. How thick is it? Because sometimes you'll get these briskets that have a flat section that comes all the way out and it's really, really thin, so it might be longer. This one was actually one of the shorter briskets, but it was better in weight. And when I look at this flat section here, the thinnest part, it's about the size of my thumb. So that's actually pretty good thickness. We're not gonna have to cut a ton of it off. What else do I look at? I can't remember. There was one more thing. Oh, that's right, I remember. The sell-by date. Now, a lot of people freak out about sell-by dates. Remember, sell-by dates are not necessarily use-by dates. When I go to Costco, I can pick up a brisket, and if it says, this one, for example, says sell by July 10th, which might be when this video is coming out, I'm not sure. But don't necessarily stress that that's the day you have to do it by, because life happens. Yeah, you may want to sit outside all day on a Saturday drinking beers and smoking a brisket, but then something comes up and you can't do it. I've bought briskets before, and I've let them sit in my fridge for 2-3 weeks past the sell-by date. And I actually think they came out better than if I cooked them before the sell-by date. And plus, these are vacuum sealed. They're not gonna spoil unless you leave them in your fridge for, a year and a half or something. That might not be a good idea. But anyway, let's get into cutting the brisket. And the first thing I'm gonna do is throw it in the freezer. You can't freeze a brisket, Josh, are you crazy? Yes, I can do whatever I want, actually. I'm just kidding. I got a ton of comments on my first brisket video from people that were like, you shouldn't put a brisket in the freezer, you're gonna destroy it or whatever. The reason I'm gonna throw it in the freezer is it's pretty hot in my house. We've been talking for a few minutes now, and this meat is starting to get a little warm. And the problem is once I open this brisket up and start cutting the fat off, the fat's gonna get a little tacky and melty and when I'm using a sharp knife, I don't necessarily want to screw with that. So putting this in the freezer will allow the brisket to harden back up a little bit. It'll allow the fat to harden up, so I'll have an easier time cutting it and a safer time cutting it. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather be smoking a brisket all day than getting stitches in the hospital. And before I let you go, first off, if you notice my cutting board, this was a gift from my good friend Pete. Pete, I love you, thank you so much. This is a work of art, and I'm so happy to finally have a decent sized cutting board to cut big pieces of meat like brisket. And another thing I want to mention is having a proper knife to cut your briskets. This is a Mercer boning knife. It's curved, as you can see. It's beautiful. I'll put a link to this knife in the description, but I got this on Amazon. It's like $5 or something ridiculous. I've prepped a ton of meat with this. It stayed sharp. And honestly, you're doing barbecue. Things are gonna get messy. You might drop the knife. You might throw it at something. Who knows what's gonna happen. So in my opinion, it's not worth spending your money on a really expensive knife to do backyard barbecue. If you spend a few bucks on something like this, it stays sharp for a while, and then when it's dull, you can either sharpen it or just throw it out. And then if you drop it and ruin it, it's not really a big deal. You're not gonna cry yourself to sleep that night. You might be asking, do I really need a boning knife to prep briskets? My answer is yes. I used my really beautiful, expensive $5 chef's knife the first time I prepped a brisket, and it just doesn't have the flexibility. It's too big. With this boning knife, you can really get in there and get some of the fat out in different crevices. So use this smaller knife. It'll be much easier to work with than this giant thing. All right, I'll be back in 20. Okay, it's been about 20 minutes. Brisket's still very pliable, but it's not as warm as it was before. Let's get to cutting. So one thing you always want to do is you want to have a dirty hand and a clean hand. My clean hand is going to be my right hand, my dominant hand, so I can do the slicing and not screw anything up. And then I will glove my left hand. I'm going to use a nice cheap aluminum foil pan to throw my trimmings in, and I'll show you why in the next video. All right, to open this, I have my fat side up, and that way when I poke a little hole right here, I'm not going into the actual meat. I'm going to try to keep all the juices inside this thing if possible, and did a pretty good job. Another thing I forgot to mention before, another thing I look for is any kind of big slices, like bad butchering in the meat itself, and I don't see anything, which is really good. Just something you should probably look for. All right, the first cuts I always make are going to be along the edges here, and I'm gonna do length cuts. So I'm gonna start back here and try my best to make some smooth cuts. Now right here, I'm cutting through a bunch of fat, and if you're new to this, you might be asking, why am I doing this? Well, it's very hard to see where the fat cap actually starts and ends. So doing a nice clean cut right down the side here will give me that answer. And we can see now we have a very thick fat cap. Got the decal right here that divides the flattened point. And if you're new to cooking brisket, you're probably going to freak out when you cut off all this stuff. And I'd rather you cut off more than less. And the reason for that is you want a good quality product in the end. Yeah, you can throw a brisket on without doing any slicing. However, at the end of the day, you're just gonna have a lot of chunks of fat and stuff you don't want that you're gonna end up throwing out anyway. So why not take it off beforehand and use this stuff for something else? So now we're on the underside of the brisket. I don't worry too much about getting like any silver skin off. I mean, yeah, you can drive yourself crazy. We have all that. And like the best thing to do would just be like stick the knife under like this and try to get it off. But like I said, there's not much there that I really want to deal with. I'm just gonna look at some of these parts right here, maybe over here, anything that's like sticking up. I see this right here, which is just gross. We'll take that off. So that looks pretty good, but I do want to talk about this right here. This big hunk of fat. Now you want to cut this down, but there's some mixed feelings about this chunk of fat right here. Some people are like, oh, you need to leave it in somewhat so the brisket stays up while you're cooking it. I don't agree. I'm literally just going to come in here and cut it right out. And that's actually not the worst I've seen before. You're not going to be able to get all of it out, but if you can get the majority of it out, that's going to render some great results in the end. Okay, that's good. So flipping it over, I'm looking at The fat cap, we got a great fat cap. It's nice and thick in the flat section. So the first thing I want to look at is this thin area right here. So I'm looking for the meat itself, not the fat, the meat to be the thickness of my thumb, which for the most part, it's not too bad, but I am gonna come in here and just cut a little part right here. And the reason I'm doing that is because it's gonna burn. If you don't, it's just gonna be a wasted piece. Might do a little bit more. And then this side obviously is really good, but I don't want any pointy edges. So I'm just gonna come in like that. That looks great. Same thing back here. Just gonna cut off anything that's just looking weird. Big chunk of fat right there. Okay, so now we're going to start the process of trimming this fat down, and we're looking for a 1/4 inch thickness. That's pretty much the magic number. So this is a big chunk of fat right here. And as you can just see, I have a bald spot now, not a big deal. This is the most time-consuming part. The fat is already getting a little bit sticky and melting in my hand. So that shows you how hot it is right now. And look at that, just all fat. I don't really know what I want to do with this area up here. It'll make for some good burnt ends, but it's a little thin, it might burn. And like I just said here, if you get some bald spots, you know, you're not gonna be perfect. It's completely fine. You don't want the whole brisket to be bald spots, but. And this is why a good sharp knife is important, so you don't kill yourself. This brisket is pretty fatty from what I can see. So we're gonna end up taking a lot of this off. And like I said, if you're new to this, you're gonna feel really weird because you paid for this meat and you're just cutting shit off of it. But usually I take off about, maybe about 3 to 4 pounds of just fat. Oh, another bald spot. Getting a lot of bald spots today. It's sort of hard to gauge. And you know what? At the end of the day, in the point section, you can leave more fat because that's going to protect the meat a little bit more. I'm literally sweating my ass off right now. Just imagine, and this is why I say this boning knife is great, because imagine doing this with a chef's knife. You really can't work it in here and have the accuracy that you can with this boning knife. This is looking pretty good, guys. Yeah, I know there are some bald spots, but it is what it is. It's not really a big deal. Got a pretty even fat cap all the way around, a little thicker on this side, but I don't want to screw with it too much. If I can just get in here and try to cut a little bit of this out. Just make for a little better results in the end. All right, that's looking good. Not my best work, but hey, you know what? Some briskets are a little more difficult than others. All right, so let's talk about seasoning. So Texas style, salt, pepper only, that's a great option. You can't go wrong with that with really any kind of barbecue. However, I prefer this seasoning that John Lewis uses in his restaurants. He's very open about this. So it's a mix of 8 parts black pepper, 3 parts kosher salt, 1 part garlic powder, and 3 parts Lowry's seasoned salt. Now this stuff is salt, but it has some spices, paprika. It's good on a lot of different stuff. So it adds a little bit of more flavor to the meat, I think. And if I show you this, it looks a lot like it's just black pepper, but there is some color in there. I've mixed it around. Generally with briskets, you want to have, I think, more pepper than salt, but I'm also a pepper fanatic. So maybe don't trust my opinion, but the pepper is what's going to make that delicious bark on the outside. So to season, we're starting with the meat side down, and I'm gonna throw a little bit of pickle juice on here first. This is something I started doing recently. And then some yellow mustard. Not a terrible, huge amount, but just enough so we can get our binder to stick. Our seasoning to stick, excuse me. And I mix everything together in these Costco shakers. I feel that this incorporates everything very well. And when you go through this, you want to be very careful to make sure you get an even coating across. And just keep in mind, you're going to need to continuously shake because salt will end up rising. You don't want to season too much because this brisket's going to shrink down. You can be a little bit more liberal with the fat over here. And that looks pretty damn good. I would say start with that side first because if you screw up, no one's going to see it. And we can be more liberal with the seasoning on this side because of the fat. So I'm going to try my best to get, oh, that's a lot. Try my best to get the sides. So you want to get all angles of the brisket. I'm not good at seasoning the sides. I never have been. Okay, and now same thing on this side. I'm gonna just run down the brisket. I don't know if you could just see that, but I had lots of salt coming out there. So it's always good to just sort of mix it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what I consider a perfectly seasoned brisket. Now you can use these chunks of fat and useless meat for a variety of different things. I said I was gonna show you what I was gonna do in the next video, but I'm gonna make beef tallow with them. And that's a little bit of a secret to keep your brisket even moister, whatever. But that's gonna be it for today's video. Like I said, this is only part 1. You gotta check out the other 3 parts, and all those will be posted in the description. I hope you found value, especially if you're a new brisket cook or new to barbecue. Like I said, it's gonna feel really bad when you cut all this stuff off your brisket, but at the end of the day, it's not gonna be usable anyway, so why waste it and throw it out when you can cut it off beforehand, get a better result, and then use it for other things. But if you enjoyed this video and it helped you out some, please hit that like button. Gets my content out to more people. Leave a comment of maybe other videos you want to see or other techniques you use for your brisket cutting and seasoning. I'll put a link to part 2, the first half of cooking a brisket, right here. And then over here, a playlist of all of the smoker cooks I've done. Right in the middle, you can subscribe if you love me that much. Until next time, everyone, stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy, stay tuned.